Good morning, Year 8. I hope you're well and having a lovely day. Please could you write the date and the title, comparing unpleasant characters. For your do now, I would like you to write down what the word sham means. Pause the video for 2 minutes to do this now. For this lesson, you'll need a pen, pencil and highlighter, your exercise book, and the attached PDF extracts, Mrs. Havisham and Scrooge. Do now review. The word sham means a thing that isn't what it seems, bogus or false, falsely presenting something as truth. So make sure you've got this definition written down. Today we'll be meeting a character called Miss Havisham from Great Expectations. Having is a sham. In describing her, Dickens presents a portrait of a woman who has wealth but not love. Miss Havisham was jilted on her wedding day. Jilted means you're left at the altar. As a result, she's become a bitter and unpleasant character. A portrait of Miss Havisham. When Pip, the main character in the story, the protagonist, is still a small child, Miss Havisham, a rich, eccentric lady, employs him as a playmate for her adopted ward, Estella. A ward is a bit like a foster child. Miss Havisham was jilted at the altar, and although it happened years in the past, she remains fixed in the moment in time. That was her moment of greatest hope and greatest pain. So for your task, I would like you to spend 10 minutes reading the Miss Havisham extract very carefully. So, how is Miss Havisham presented? Using the extract below, I'd like you to annotate how Miss Havisham is described and how Pip responds to her. The extract is highlighted on your handout. So let's read it through together. It was not in the first few moments that I saw all these things, though I saw more of them in the first moments than might be supposed. But I saw that everything within my view, which ought to be white, had been white long ago, and had lost its lustre, and was faded and yellow. I saw that the bride within the bridal dress had withered like the dress, and like the flowers, and had no brightness left, but the brightness of her sunken eyes. I saw that the dress had been put upon the rounded figure of a young woman, and that the figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone. Once I had been taken to see some ghastly waxwork at the fair, representing I know not what impossible personage lying in state. Once I had been taken to one of our old March churches to see a skeleton in the ashes of a rich dress that had been dug out of a vault under the church pavement. Now, waxwork and skeleton seemed to have dark eyes that moved and looked at me. I should have cried out, if I could. So pause the video for 10 minutes to annotate the extract. So, using the extract below, annotate how Miss Havisham is described. Let's have a look at the annotations that hopefully you've made. Everything within my view which ought to be white had been white long ago and had lost its lustre and was faded and yellow. So lustre is brightness, so there is a sense of decay in the room and a lack of life. Withered like the dress and like the flowers, and had no brightness left but the brightness of her sunken eyes. Withered has connotations of death and weakness. You wither away, you fade away to nothing. Figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone, almost skeletal. Also, skin and bone indicates, a death-like figure. Ghastly waxwork, horrific and scary to look at. The idea that she is more object than person, perhaps a figment of an imagination, or something out of a horror story. Now waxwork and skeleton seemed to have dark eyes that moved and looked at me. Movement signals reality. She is alive despite looking withered and death-like. So if you haven't got these annotations down, please could you make a note of them. Dickens creates some unpleasant characters. In today's lesson, you are going to compare Miss Havisham and Scrooge. How does Dickens present unpleasant characters? You're going to be using your notes on Miss Havisham from today's lesson and your notes on Scrooge, week 1, to build an answer to this question. So before starting, Please read the extracts for comparison on your handout. We have read and made notes on them already, so you may want to revisit these. You may also want to jot down any comparisons as annotations. So to clarify, you're looking at the Miss Havisham extract and the Scrooge extract. Pause the video for 10 minutes to do this now. So Scrooge, we've noted that he's squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. All words suggesting that Scrooge takes the things he wants, even if it belongs to someone else. The list emphasises just how ruthless and selfish he is. Not selfless. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. He does not have or want any friends or relationships and prefers to be alone. The cold within him froze his old features. He never smiles or expresses emotion. Extremes of weather, such as wind, falling snow, heaviest rain, hail, and sleet, emphasize his cold countenance as unchanging, regardless of what's going on around him. It's a way for Dickens to show that Scrooge has a lack of care for his surroundings because he is so self-absorbed that no wind that blew was bitterer than he, further conveys his selfish and unfeeling nature. So Miss Havisham, everything within my view which ought to be white had been white long ago and had lost its lustre, and was faded and yellow. Sense of the decay in the room, lack of life. Withered like the dress and like the flowers, and had no brightness left but the brightness of her sunken eyes. Withered connotations of death and weakness. Figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone, almost skeletal, and now waxwork and skeleton seemed to have dark eyes that moved and looked at me. Movement signals reality. She's alive despite looking withered and death-like. So pause for a moment, consider how these two characters may have been presented in a similar manner, or not if you don't think so. Using the notes you've collected, group your evidence into relevant pairs. For example, extremes of weather such as wind, falling snow, heaviest rain, hail, sleet, to emphasise that Scrooge's cold countenance is unchanging, regardless of what's going on around him. It is a way for Dickens to show that Scrooge has a lack of care for his surroundings because he is so self-absorbed that no wind that blew was bitterer than he. It further conveys his selfish and unfeeling nature. That links with everything within my view which ought to be white had been white long ago and had lost its lustre and was faded and yellow. Sense of decay in the room, lack of life. Despite this, Dickens shows that Miss Havisham is unchanging as her surroundings, that she does not respond to her surroundings. This emphasises how self-absorbed she is as a result of her misery. So you've got a clear link between the two extracts. So how does Dickens present unpleasant characters? Using the notes you've collected, put together a comparative paragraph. You should follow the steps on the following slides, pausing as you complete. There are 8 steps in total. 1. Introduction. In both extracts, Dickens presents Scrooge and Miss Havisham as insert connection. Pause video to do that. Okay, Dickens uses insert term technique method here in the phrase insert quotation to present Scrooge as something. Pause the video to complete step 2. Step 3. The choice of word, insert a word from quotation. If you want to improve the quality of that section, change word to a word class. So, for instance, the choice of the verb, the choice of the adjective. Then you insert your word and then suggests insert connotation or synonym here. 4. This makes the reader, and then you insert reaction. So pause to complete steps 3 and 4. Okay, 5. Similarly, insert key term technique method here. In the phrase, insert quote from text here is used to show Miss Havisham is also. Pause the video to complete step 5. Then you've got step 6. The choice of the word, or ideally word class, insert word from quotation here, suggests insert connotation or synonym there. Remember, a synonym is a word that is very similar to another word, but it's slightly different. This makes the reader insert reaction there, pause the video, and then finish with a comparative statement. So this should mirror step 1, pretty much sum up the connection you've made. Okay, so that's the end of that 8-step process. It should look something like this. Dickens presents Scrooge and Miss Havisham as being non-responsive to their environments. In A Christmas Carol, Dickens uses pathetic fallacy such as wind, falling snow, heaviest rain, hail, and sleet to emphasize that Scrooge's cold countenance is unchanging, regardless of what is going on around him. It is a way for Dickens to show that Scrooge has a lack of care for his surroundings because he is so self-absorbed, and no wind that blew was bitterer than he, further conveys his selfish and unfeeling nature to the reader. Similarly, in Great Expectations, Dickens presents Miss Havisham as unchanging by showing that she does not respond to her surroundings. The quote, "Everything within my view which ought to be white had been white long ago, and had lost its lustre, and was faded and yellow." The word yellow gives a sense of decay, and conveys a lack of life within the room. This emphasizes how self-absorbed she is, because as a result of her misery, she is living in squalor. Both characters are described in a negative fashion, because they neglect the environment around them as a result of selfish behaviour. So that brings us to the end of today's lesson. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. If you haven't read or watched the Dickens novels that we've been talking about, I highly recommend you give it a go because they are very interesting. There's a fantastic poem by Carol Ann Duffy, one of my all-time favourites, called Havisham. So I would advise you reading that. It's very short. It's very Carol Ann Duffy. We looked at her a little bit earlier this year. Very idiosyncratic in terms of simple language, very passionate, very to the point. So Havisham is the name of that poem. Strongly advise reading it. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'll speak to you next time.